Here I've selected 10 very proven trout flies that I'd like to teach you to tie. We'll take you to the bench and we're going to go step-by-step instruction to tie each and every one of these flies. And as we go along the way, we'll stop at some water and show you some little fishing tips as well. I hope you enjoy this instructional materials that we put together for you. Hi, and welcome to Fly Tying Basics. Where we'll start here is on this DVD is run you through some very basic principles of fly tying, and where we'll start is with the hook. We want to put our hook into the vise so the point is still protruding out. Some books will have it setting in and to protect you from cutting the thread. That does damage the shank, so I don't want to do that. It'll weaken it. What we want to do is make sure our shank is laying horizontal, nice and straight. And the hook is so important. It's our measuring stick, if you will. We have the eye, we have the shank, then we have the bend, we have the point, and then the barb. So this is all measuring. The shank length, of course, is where we're going to use our proportions for our nymphs and dry flies and so forth. The distance between the point and the shank is called a gap, and that is also measuring a stick that we'll use. And we'll get into that as we tie each and every fly as we go along, and also the tools that we use if any special tools come up that you have in your kit with all your materials. So we'll get started on our first fly. Is our woolly bugger, and this is, in my opinion, one of the best flies I think that has ever been created. Many different colors and sizes. There's so many variations of this fly. It's so suggestive. What we'll do, just to start out with, is I want to put I'm going to wrap some lead wire around the front of the shank. I'm pulling this down fairly tight. Pinch it off my thumbnails, and then position it to the front. Now, what that does, the lead wire will create some undulation, give it the movement that the fly needs to be very effective. I'm just going to put a little thread over top. Dress the shank. I always put a little thread over top of the shank so it's not as slippery and it holds your materials much easier. Now, the bend and the shank, where the shank and the bend meet, is your tie-in position for the tail, and that's right above the point of the barb. So what we'll do then is grab some marabou that you have in your bag. We basically measure our tail about shank length. We lay it on top of the shank. I measured it. Now I'm just going to pinch it on each side with my thumb and finger and tie it down. And right at the rear, I'm going to take one turn in behind. That just locks in that marabou tail nice and solid. And then I can either clip what we call the butts of the marabou, or I can just tie it down. So we call it fly tying. It's more like fly wrapping. Everything is just wrapped around and around. So we can also add a little flash on this. We'll just use a little crystal flash, a couple strands. Just grab it here. And what I do is just lay it on about the same length of the tail, tie it down, and then pull it to me on one side and away from me on the other side, and trim the one side off. So they should both be about equal the length of the tail. That'll give it a little accent, a little extra sparkle. You don't have to use crystal flash, and emphasize, don't use too much flash. Now when we're cutting and working with wire, it's important that we don't use the tips of our scissors and dull them. You always want to cut with the inside of the blade. Keep the tips very sharp. I'm going to use wire in a lot of my patterns for extra durability. Of course, we want to tie flies we can fish with, so we want them to last as long as possible. Now we can take some olive chenille, and tie that in at the back. This is our tie-in position at the back. It's where all your materials will be tied in. And then we'll take the thread forward to the tie-off position, just behind the eye. Now with the materials, I'm going to leave the wire in behind. That'll go over top later. We're just going to go hand over hand with our chenille. This is rayon chenille, very simple, easy to work with. There's so many variables out there now in chenilles that you can create unlimited woolly buggers, sizes, shapes, colors. But this is such an effective fly. I laid my scissors on the eye again, so I use that for a guide, so I'm not damaging the scissor point. Now we'll go to we're going to give you some neck hackle here. Select one out of the middle. They get larger up top and smaller down the bottom for smaller dry flies. You'll see when we go to select that. When I go to cut the feather, or call a hackle, I'm going to trim it right, that webby off the bottom there. Strip the stem. Then I come in at a 45-degree angle, and it'll tie in my feather at a 45 degree. So it's simply take a couple turns to the front and then wind it to the rear, the shank, where we have our wire sitting at the back. This is what we need for, as soon as I can find it, there we go, it's hiding on me. Now I can go over top the hackle. Watch it, I don't wrap too much hackle down, I just kind of weave it through there, and that puts a lot of more strength into the fly. Now when we go to tie off, what I do is take a few turns to the front and then I switch my material underneath. I'm wrapping the front, then I just bring my wire ahead, get a turn, that's switch tying off. You do about 3 or 4 of those and that wire is tied off very good. Take my scissors, lay it along the angle of the eye and cut again on the inside. Now the tip feather I can just pull off. Now we'll just pull this all back with our fingers. And we'll do what we call the head of the fly with thread. Usually on my weighted flies I use black thread. That way I know on my fly box that any flies with black thread, other than my dry flies of course, are weighted. Now we can use a whip finish tool. Well, I'm going to use a half hitch just to show you how easy it can be. You use an ordinary ballpoint pen if you like for this. Just turn to the inside, slip it off. You can do 2, slip it off over the eye. It keeps some pressure on there too. You always want to maintain pressure when you're tying. Anytime you let a little slack in there, your fly won't be as durable. And then we can just saw that off. And there's a woolly bugger, and that is one of the best fishing flies that I've ever fished. And it's not real pretty to look at, but one of the most effective flies that you'll use on the water in various sizes and colors. Let's show you how to cast a streamer. Basically what we want to do is get our line, our streamers are weighted, or we can use sink tip lines, and we cast our line up the current, up and across, so we call it. Allows our fly and our line time to sink to the desired depth where the fish are holding, and we just start stripping it back. Okay, we'll show you once again. We're going to cast upstream, let the fly sink, keep contact. Once it starts, we're going to strip it back to us across the current. And basically that's it. Okay, we're going to change thread here now to do our next fly. Putting on some brown 6/0 thread. We have just a wire threader. We're going to slip through the front of the bobbin. As it goes through, we'll just fold our thread in half and put it through the wire here. Slip it through the wire. Make sure we get our tag pulled all the way through. And as we pull that bobbin thread through, the thread goes through the tube. So make sure that and your tension, you want it to slide fairly easy. If it doesn't, you want to make sure you hold your bobbin and spread it down here, and make sure you don't break it in the bottom. It's very brittle down here. They could break a weld. So make sure it just has a little tension. And there we go. We have new thread color. Okay, we'll put our little nymph hook in to the vise again, as we did earlier. Make sure it's laying straight. As we start our thread, we're basically holding our tag end and wrapping over the tag from the front to the back. It doesn't have to be wrapped solid on the shank, but just that extra thread on there will, what we call dressing the hook, so it's not as slippery. Okay, we're going to use two very simple fly tying materials, peacock herl and pheasant tail. Just wonderful material you can make so many good fly patterns with. We'll take some of the pheasant, I'm going to strip it and pull it perpendicular from the stem before I pull it off. That way the tips will be nice and straight. I'm going to measure basically between the shank and the point, give me the length of the tail. I measured it with one hand. Now I changed hands and I pinched it on the top and tied it down. There's my tail. Now we'll go to our peacock herl. Very nice material here. I'm going to grab probably 4 or 5 strands of peacock herl here. Cut it off by the tips. Now I can just pinch that on each side of the shank with my thumb and finger. That's called a pinch. And we're just going to go around the thread a little bit, create a peacock rope. Give a little more durability to your fly. Now we'll just wrap the body forward with the peacock herl, just like we did the chenille on the woolly bugger. But we want to go about 2/3 of the shank, and I can just tie it off right here and trim the butts off. Now we'll pinch off or pull aside another little clump of pheasant tail fibers. Now what I want to do is have the tips coming about the rear of the body, and I'm holding it by the eye. Wrap these butts down to the rear of the eye. Cut the butts off at an angle. We're good to go. Now we can grab some more peacock herl. Usually here I'll grab a little bit more for the front thorax, just a little bit thicker. We want to cut the tips again. Now this will do a couple flies. You don't need to discard all of the peacock herl. I'm going to create a rope again that's just going to be a little bit thicker. There we go. And we're going to tie it off. I'm going to take some turns behind the eye, take my material behind, front, cut it at an angle, make sure you don't cut your thread. And this little bit of peacock herl will do another fly. I simply pull the tips of the pheasant over the front, over the top. That's what we call a wing case over the top. I tie it down. Now we have these tips here. What we want to do is divide them equally. Take some on each side, about equal amount, 3 or 4, whatever you have on each side for the legs. And we'll just make our head thread here again. Now, the biggest mistake fly tiers do is they crowd the head too much with the thread. You want to make sure you leave a little bit of room there for your head. Now what we're going to use now is a Matarelli style whip finish. Basically just spins there very freely. We have the hook. We're going to grab the hook with the thread and come in around the rear. There's a little indentation on the back wire. Then we just go with our bobbin and we create a number 4. And we're going to wrap over top the bobbin thread. Go over that as many times as you like. And I like to take it to the rear of the head before I pull it down. That'll hide the thread really nicely. Slip it off the back and pull it off the front. Saw it off with the side of the scissor. So there's just a nice, neat little peacock halfback. Such a suggestive fly, and takes very minimal materials, and the fish really like to eat this fly. Let's talk about the basics of lake fishing. Fish in a lake must cruise around for their food, so we must change our presentation dramatically. Our first choice for lake fishing is a clear intermediate line. I use that about 80% of the time. Get a nice long cast out. The next important step is I put my rod tip in the water to keep direct contact with the fly. Then it becomes not our casting, but our fishing hand, or free hand here, how we strip our flies. It could be a short little 2-inch pull for small insects, maybe possibly a hand twist, 4 or 6-inch pull and a pause. Pauses are important. Could be a long, slow pull for a leech. Pull, pause. The basics of lake fishing. Give it a try if you haven't fished still waters. It's a whole new realm for you to experience. It's a great opportunity. We'll run to our next fly, the elk hair caddis. We're going to make a little variation on, put a little trailing shuck on it. We notice that makes quite a difference and improves the fishability of the fly. Just changed my thread to match the color. I went to a tan 6/0 thread. 6/0 for a lot of my flies, unless they get real small, then I'll go to 8/0. Or if they're very large flies, you can go to a 3/0 thread, but 6/0 is pretty all around. Now we're just going to get some antron here, or Zelon, and we just want just a few strands in behind, and then we want that the length of the body in behind. This will be the shuck where the insect has crawled out and is ready to hatch. This is a very vulnerable stage of the insect, so we feel this is a stage we like to fish a little more often. Now at the rear, we'll just go to our hackle again, and as we know, it's small hackles down the bottom of the neck or the cape. And we can size these hackles for the size of fly. I've got about a size 12. I got a size 12 hook in the vise right now. So pull out a saddle. You can use a gauge, or you can just measure it along the shank to the tip. I've tied it in from the tip at the back of the shank. That'll palmer my hackle so it lays forward, dry fly style. If you have it so it lays back, palmers to the rear, we call that wet fly style. And you can do that by tying the butt in at the front, in behind the eye, and then reinforcing with wire like we did with the woolly bugger. Notice a lot of the techniques will start doubling up from different patterns, and the techniques will cross over many, many times. Now this thread is very lightly waxed. You can use some dubbing wax if you like. Basically taking some of my dubbing here, this hare's ear dubbing, and it's all blended. And I'm just going to roll it between my fingers as it comes out onto the thread. If you can see that, as I roll it on, it just comes out of my other fingers, and I can continue trying to keep the blend tied together. I can slide that up a little bit. Now you can also use dry fly dubbing, which is actually treated waterproof. We're going to use a hare's ear. We can use that for our nymphs and dry flies as well. It's got a little buggy appearance. There's our dubbing for hares, for a caddis. Now we'll just palmer the hackle forward. We're just going to make sure that the hackle goes straight. We're not turning it, just palmering it forward, and we tie it off the head, behind the head. Okay, a few little pieces in the way here, tie back over, You don't want any barb sticking in the eye. That'll make it a little more difficult to tie the fly on when we need to tie these on. Usually at dark, so we want to make sure that that all comes on there. Little shuck sticking out the back. Now we're going to use just a hair stacker, which is just a brass tube. Fits inside. These comes in different sizes. Here's just kind of a regular size. Grab some elk and we're going to cut it off the patch close to the hide. And we need to get rid of all this underfur, this fuzzy junk at the bottom. It won't stack. Your hair will not stack with that inside. So we can brush that all out. Then these tips, you'll see, are very uneven, but I'll put the tips in first into the stacker, drop them down, give it a few taps, lay down sideways here, and I should have my tips should be fairly straight. Pull it out without, I see a couple here that aren't quite right. There we go. I'm going to lay the tips to about the bend of the hook, straight over the top, and I'm going to pinch on both sides of the shank. And we're going to take a soft loop. I'm going to pull it up. The tension, if I pull it up, will leave the hair on top. I'm going to pull tighter, tighter, and tighter. And that should stay on top of the shank without rolling on you. Now we'll just take these butts, we're going to pull them back and get a few turns, good turns in behind the eye, and stand that up. Now we'll do our tie off with our whip finish before we cut these butts, because these are easier to hang on to at this point. Go again with our hook in, her on the back. We're going to wrap over top the bobbin thread with our 4, come off the back, pull it down and off the front hook, and then you've tied it off. Now we'll just give it a little mohawk trim right here. We just did a little short tuft of hair. Now we'll talk about casting dry flies. The dry fly cast is relatively short, almost more with the wrist than too much arm movement. Stopping the rod up high, let my leader straighten, present the dry fly down. Let the leader turn over. When fishing a dry fly, the most important thing in our presentation is that the drift is a dead drift. That means it moves at the exact speed of the current. You don't want it dragging, the fish will refuse it. They will know it's a fake. So you want to drift the same speed of the current. That's a dead drift. Our next fly we're going to tie is a bead-headed hare's ear nymph. Now these beads are drilled out. They have a small and a large taper in the back. You want the taper at the back. It helps it slide around the bend of the hook. Now what we'll do then is we'll still use our tan thread. It'll blend in with our dubbing. We're going to use hare's ear, natural hare's ear color. You can change your colors to suit your conditions. Dress the shank again with thread. Now the actual hare's ear was made with a complete hare's mask, and you use guard hairs for the tail. We're going to use just some pheasant tail fibers again for the tail, like we did earlier on our halfback. That makes a great little tail. And tie that in. Now it's about gap length again. Now I'm just going to tie this down, just to keep the body a little more uniform. Cut the butts off there with the points of my scissors. Now a gold rib hare's ear, of course, has a gold rib. What I've done is just use one strand of crystal flash that we used in the tail of our woolly bugger there. Just one strand for my ribbing. Now we're going to we're going to dub on our hare's ear dubbing. The rear 2/3, the nymph's body is 2/3 the length of the shank, and the thorax is 1/3 is the average rule of thumb for that. Now we're just turning our dubbing on. I'm just in between my thumb and my finger, just like warming it up. It's in one motion. I'm not going back. It's in one motion. Just keep rolling it onto the thread. And as I turn it on, it will wind around the shank of the hook. I'm going to go thinner at the back, and I'm going to taper it a little thicker to the front. We can go back over itself. Now there I am, about 2/3. Now I'm going to just go a little bit thicker. Run that dubbing. I can slide that down, and I just make a little thicker at the front. Those hairs sticking up are good. Now we'll take our crystal flash, and we'll take about 4 or 5 turns forward, and that'll be good to create our ribbing, our segmentation. A little sparkle too. We'll tie that all off now. The wing case, you can use turkey quill as it asks in many recipes. You could use pheasant tail, which we have here. That'll work fine. Or you can go to a flashback pheasant tail, which you can just make out of a clump of this nice pearl crystal flash. And I'm going to pinch that on the side. Make sure that's not going to roll away on me. Pinching it there. One hand is your wrapping hand. This is your holding hand. Just as important. We can trim all that off there. We don't need to tend with everything there. Now, we want the back to be a little more sparse, and we want the front to be thicker and bushier on our nymphs. So what we'll do now is create a dubbing loop. This will create a lot buggier material in here. We're going to go a little different method here. Now all I've done, I'll just back up to show you. I'm going around the shank again. I've created a loop, as you can see here in my finger. Now I'm going to go forward to the tie off position. That's where I'm going to tie off. Taking in a little dubbing spin or a dubbing whirl. Has 2 hooks. It holds the thread out a little bit. I'm just going to turn it. Start spinning it a little bit. There's 2 ways to do a dubbing whirl. Now I'm going to take my dubbing, as you see here, and I can just slide it up in between the threads. And it's I got way more than I need at this point. I'm going to turn it down, keep turning it. I can pluck a lot of this extra off now. It's not going to hold. I should have enough to create a buggy thorax. Just go around. You can use a dubbing hook if you like on that. There's different. And this makes a much dubbier or buggier thorax, which creates more of the legs and the movement in the water. Just going to keep going. This looks a little rough right at this point. And pluck out any of the fibers that are loose. We just keep wrapping forward till behind the bead. I'll just tie the thread off. Just go in behind, in front, in behind, tie off, and cut the thread out. There. That's very, very, very buggy. Now we'll pull our flash over the top. That creates our wing case. With our crystal flash. Trim it down in behind the bead. Get our whip finish in the front hook, the back, number 4, over the bobbin thread, a few turns in behind the bead. And there you go. Then you drop head cement in. On all these flies I use head cement. But I usually tie a lot of flies and then I'll cement them at once so they don't get too thick. Nymphs, in my opinion, can't get buggy enough. It just creates more live movement. Next method we want to show you is nymphing with an indicator. This is the easiest. We have our little indicator on top, which is a little float. We're going to cast upstream, give our fly time to sink below the indicator. When it moves, we're just keeping our line slack above it. When it moves, set up. It could be a rock, it could be a fish. next fly we're going to do is a bead-headed pheasant tail nymph. Another very simplistic nymph pattern that all we're using for materials again is pheasant tail and peacock herl. And this is a very effective fly again, folks. We're just going to pull off some of the fibers from the pheasant tails perpendicular from the shank before you take them off so they're nice and straight. About gap length, pinch them on the side and tie it down. Now I'm not going to tie the butts down here at this point. I'm going to grab some copper wire for the rib, tie that in right at the back as well, the bend. Okay, now fold the pheasant back a little bit. We're going to take another wrap towards the bend. Now I'm going to go up to 2/3 the front. Now we're just going to wind our pheasant tail body forward to 2/3 and tie it off. Trim our butts off there. Now we're going to go reverse wrap our wire. This will just, I'm just going to turn it the other direction. This will hold our pheasant tail more securely when a fish, if you fish start chewing on it, it'll last a lot longer. Now we're going to do our wing case and legs just like we did on our halfback nymph. I'm going to take a generous amount here, pull it off the side, measure it out so it's about shank length. I'm going to tie it back 1/3 body length back. Cut these butts off. Make sure it's tied down. Don't worry about taking a lot of extra turns. More turns the better. Keep everything secure. Don't let any slack in there. Always keep tension on your thread. Now I've taken my peacock herl, I'm tying it in by the tips again. And what do? We're going to bug it out and make another peacock herl rope. Durability is really the key to a good fly. And of course the fish gotta like to eat it. And something about pheasant tail and our peacock herl that creates such a nice coloration and bronze color in the water. They love to eat peacock herl. There's a little thorax. I'm going to pull that wing case over the top. Let's get a turn. Got a little loose fiber here. I can just get my scissor points in there, trim that out. Now we're going to divide the tips again. Remember, you're going to have practice this to get your tips about the right length. You can tie them and cut them off if they're too long, but I like the natural taper of them legs. And we just do our whip finish tool again. Front hook, the back, number 4, and whip finish bit behind the bead head. The bead will just help the weight when we're fishing that with a sinking line to get it down. We'll go to the water and fish this fly. It's a great little pattern. One of the basic casts that comes in very handy is a roll cast. If you have obstructions behind you like trees or a bankment where you can't make a back cast, bring your rod up high, bring your horn down low. It's 2 steps basically. Sweep it behind you, hand up high, and put your arm down. It's like you're driving a nail. Back, stop, push her down. One of the most important parts of the roll cast is having your line just touch the water. That is the anchor that loads the rod as you push it down. Behind and out. Very effective cast. The next fly we're going to tie is a parachute hare's ear. The parachute style dry flies sit really nice and flat in the surface film. A new innovations from the traditional dry flies. We'll get into a split wing here next after this fly, but what we're going to start with here is just some neck hackle, and when we use the neck hackle, it's a little stiffer than the saddle hackle. we're going to just pinch off a little here for the tail, the brown neck that we provided you here. Now the measurements again on the hooks are very important. We're going to go with shank length for the tail on dry flies. Tie that on the back so it just sits straight out. Now I've got a fair amount of tailing material on that. We're going to go forward to 1/3 behind the eye. So all the proportions are very critical. I'm going to take some of my white poly yarn. And we're going to tie that in with 1/3 behind the eye. Cut it off here at an angle. Wrap those butts down. Get a little bit of an angle going there. Cover that up. Now we want a thread post or a hackle post, so we're just going to go ahead of it, tie it back, and then we'll just go around it. Form a little bit of a base so we can tie our hackle on. Parachute style. Very, very easy to tie, and they're becoming very, very popular because how they fish in the film. Okay, now we're going to do our body. We'll use our hare's ear dubbing again. You can change the colors, of course, to match any of the natural insects you want just by changing the materials. You can use dry fly dubbing as well, which is natural floatant, or floatant, put it right into it. And what we're doing here is just going very fine on the thread, just to cover it so we don't have it too thick, not like when we did our hare's ear nymph. We want this to be a thinner body, and we're going to taper it. We're going to go thinner at the back and just a little bit thicker as we go forward. Now you'll see when we get to the poly wing there, we get a natural taper happening there. Then I'm just going to finish the off behind the eye with the dubbing. I'm going to go all the way through. Now someplace it'll show you to do that after we tie the hackle in. I tie so many flies commercially now, I look for little shortcuts, and I think the fly looks pretty good this way, and it's a lot quicker to tie. So I like to spend a little more time in the water than I do on the vise. So we're going to take and size our hackle up again, where it's about 1.5 the gap. We're going to trim our hackle. As you see the web coming up here, as you'll notice right in here, we're going to cut that off about so. Pinch off a little bit of our stem, and I can tie that on. We're just laying it in the other side of the thread post. I've actually tied it on the thread post, not onto the hook. It's a little bit of a shortcut. Now we just wrap about 3 turns around. I'm just going to go in through the hackle with my thread on the thread post, not on the hook. Then about third way, we're just going to take a little bit of a cheat here, if you will, and go right forward to behind the eye, where I can just finish my head right in there and then tie it off. For whip finish again, and there we go. Let's talk about mending line and why mend line. Here we have a soft water, some heavy water, and some soft water. If I throw out a straight line cast across it, you're going to see the current is going to drag my line real quick. And the drag will turn a fish off. So what we need to do, we get our cast in, we reach with a rod tip and throw a little bit of line upstream with a rod tip. That's mending. That's to keep your line above and get your dead drift through the current, the speed of the current. That'll put you in the game. We'll tie an upright winged fly this time with some of the same materials we have in our package. You notice how many flies we can tie with very minimal amount of tools and materials. You'll add to your tying arsenal as you keep going, but what we'll do is grab a brown saddle here again, or a neck, I'm sorry, the neck hackle. We cut that out. Okay, what we'll do here is grab our brown neck hackle, cut the web off the bottom. We're going to select some nice stiff fibers for the tail. I want to measure the tail again to be shank length. Pinch it on the side. Your holding hand is very, very important. Put a little floatant on there too. That little extra fibers on there don't hurt you at all. I don't think that'll turn the fish away. Now we're going to go back like we did on our parachute fly. We're going to go back to third. Now that's important so you have the proper balance to your fly so it floats properly. Now we're going to tie in our poly wing again. We could use many different materials here for wings. We could use duck quills. That's what used to be used a lot, and other hackles, mallard flank makes nice wings and so forth. We're going to tie this the same way, a third back as we did in our parachute fly. Now here's where it's going to differ. We're going to divide the poly in half, and I'm just going to take a few turns to split it. Now we're going to X the pattern. We're just going to go in behind and forward. When I'm in the front, I'm going to go forward in the back. The cross or the diagonal goes from the back to the front, front to the back to the front, front to the back. Now something like that would be more like a spent wing, where it would be the insect's already hatched on this thing and is laying there spent. Now we want to set the wing. So what we need to do is go around the bottom of each wing, bit of a thread base, then we can just set it up at about a 45-degree angle. I'll do the same with the hook or the wing on this side. I want to keep our bobbin fairly close. We don't want to make too big circles. Just take a little bit of time here. Just set the wings. We can always trim because it's just poly. We can trim the height of them very easy. That's why it's so easy to use. Not only for beginners, but just a very durable and easy to see wing. Now we're going to go to the back and tie in our body. And here we are with pheasant fibers again. I just love using pheasant fibers. You can see we've tied so many flies with them, but they have the natural markings and that work so well. And a dark colored fly like this sometimes is really very, very effective. Now I've got a lot of pheasant fiber there. We can take a hackle plier if we like, just grab onto the end here, because we're going to be trying to manipulate these fibers all the way forward. I'll just demonstrate the hackle pliers. I don't use them that much. I get used to handling my materials without them, but you as a beginner or novice tyer will probably want to use them a little more. Now I'm going to tie it off there just for a brief moment. Just take one wrap there just to hold everything in place. Then I'm going to select my hackle. And we knew how to size our hackle, the smaller down the bottom of the neck, of course. And I'll go up here and grab myself what a size 12. Of course, we can just lay it on here and measure it. It's a little bit small. It'll be about a size 14 that I've grabbed there. So let's just grab a little bigger one. We go up into it a little deeper. Grab a size 12. There we go. Now I want the stem gets fairly thick. And we have the web. We're gonna cut that out, and just right where the web and the stem disappears, where we're going to start wrapping the hackle. Now this is a good side and this is a dull side of the hackle. We want to make sure that we tie. I'm just going to get my hackle pliers out of the way there. We're going to make sure that we tie the dull side facing forward. I'm just going to tie it in a 45-degree angle. Just catch it in there behind the wings. I'm going to take my tying thread to behind the eye. Now I can just continue with my pheasant fibers to behind the eye and tie them off and trim. Okay. I've seen where you can dub that with a different material, whatever, but we're going to cover that with our hackle anyway. Use our hackle pliers here again, dull side facing forward, right on the fly. So we can take 1, 2 behind. You can go 3 behind if you want, but you're going to make sure they're the same. I've got 1, 2 behind and 2 ahead of the wing. If you feel you're riding on rougher water, you can maybe give it an extra, maybe 3 turns behind and 3 in the front. But this fly sits up in the water really nice, and a little more of a rough, oh, I missed my back part of the tying tool there, and whip finish with our brown thread, which will match, you know, their fibers. Make sure you don't crowd the eye and there's no fibers sticking in there. Royal pheasant tail. It's produced a lot of trout for me. Talk about the basics of reading water in a stream or a river. Just ahead of me, you'll see the head of the run as you hit this heavy water coming through. That's nymphing water. As it forms, it comes down through here into a chute, still nymphing run. I'll be running nymphs through there, very productive water. As you see, as it carries on over, the flow comes over to the far bank, could be nymphing water. As it softens out towards the end of the tail out, we're looking at more dry fly water. Now we can fish our dry flies. There's a seam where the fast water and the soft water meet. That's a seam. That's a very productive part of the water we can fish with dry flies, nymphs, streamers, anything will work in that region. But the softer water typically is for dry flies. The heavier water, faster water is more for nymphing. So that is basically reading the water in a nutshell. Here, our next fly we'll tie is a beadhead prince nymph, which is a very general all-around nymph pattern and used in rivers and lakes. Have a bead, gold bead on the front of the hook. Go to the tie-in position just above the point of the barb. We will start tying our fly at the rear. Now we're going to use some brown goose biots for the tail. We're going to split these, one on each side. But to split them, what we need to do is we're going to build a little bit of a bump back here, a little ball of thread. I'm going to just right at the rear of the hook. Okay, now what we can do is we grab our goose biots here. We grab 2 of them. They have a natural curvature to them. So what we'll do is curve them out. We want them gap length again. And we're going to tie it just ahead of that little thread lump that we created there. Take another one on this side, curving out. I just placed it on the side with my thumb. I measured it, tied it ahead of the lump of thread, so that'll split my tail. I can just wrap the butts forward down here, just tie them down. You don't have to cut, we just keep wrapping over top. You can bury it if you want underneath there, nobody will know. So you got lots of turns. Okay, now what we're going to do, a lot of patterns call for the mylar rib, and you can use that silver mylar. Here's another alternative to that, we're going to put some copper wire on. We have the copper wire with us. I'm going to grab a few strands of our pearl crystal flash. I'm going to modify this. This is the neat thing about fly tying. You can kind of do your own thing. That'll become part of our rib. Now we're going to take our peacock herl again, which is one of the best materials. There's no question of so many flies are tied with peacock herl, and fish just love to eat it. I'm going to grab a good selection. I usually like to leave it in the bag because it can get pretty unmanageable. Sort it out, make sure I get the short ones out of here. Tie it in by the tips. We've got about 6 or 7 strands, or 8 strands will be fine. Tie it at the tips. Bug it out. And do my peacock herl rope again. For more durability. Always, durability is really one of the most important things I think a fly should have. And of course it should have all the characteristics that the fish want to eat. Now, I'm going to have to keep working our rope down. I didn't wrap it all at once. I didn't want to. I'm just going to go back over top. Here's a loose one. I can just wrap it around it. Instead of just hand over hand here where rope's kind of getting away on me. I can just hold it with one finger as I pull it around with the other. That way you can manage some very short materials there. I'm tying this fly quite large. It's just to show you in the demonstration now, you can tie this fly very, very small, but it's always better when you're learning to tie is tie a little larger patterns because they're easier to work with. Don't start trying to tie number 20 dry flies. Now we're going to go to the back to our rib again. Which are copper wire. Let's just make a rope with a wire and the crystal flash. Because the crystal flash on its own would be pretty vulnerable to the teeth of a trout and it'd fall apart on you pretty quick. This takes a little bit of time. Like say mylar, silver mylar works great on that, or silver wire even would work. But we're going to add a little bit of sparkle and rib with the wire. Crystal flash really gives it a kind of a neat appearance too. So you got a little bit of a football shape going with the Prince Nymph. That's good. Tie it off behind the bead and trim it down, and make sure you always use the inside of our scissors with wire. Now we're going to use some white goose biots for the wings. Now they've curved, they got a curve to them. I'm just going to lay one on the top at an angle that's going to come to this side, and just going to tie it right on top of the shank. We're going to get some loose turns there. I can manipulate it around a little bit, kind of where I want it. Take another one, make sure that the good side is up. You got the curve going back. You don't want to go any further than the bend of the hook or to the bend. Now I can crank them down, trim off the butts, and wrap the butts of the goose biots with my thread, just to cover the white. There, they're very secure now. We'll grab our brown hackle again. You could use saddle, but we have the brown neck hackle, and this will work fine here. This is a wet fly, or nymph, so you see the stiffer hackle up to the top? I'm going to really want the softer hackle near the bottom. Just make sure I cut the webby stuff, junk off the bottom. And then I still have the very soft hackle in here. I'm going to tie that right behind the bead. And that'll allow it to fold back as wet fly. Take 2 turns and tie it off. Right behind the bead. Now it's sticking out a little bit straighter than I want, so I'm going to pull it back with my fingers and tie it back. So it just lies back a little more wet fly style. And I'll just whip finish in behind the bead. Cut off my thread with the scissors, just like a knife, so I don't cut anything I don't want. There you have a Prince Nymph. Very, very effective fly. In this faster waters, we see this current breaking through here. Here's a good place for stonefly nymphs to get washed down a creek. We're just going to cast up into the heavy water. Keep contact with our fly by high sticking. The fly's weighted, it's bouncing along the bottom, and I should be able to feel a grab. And I can fish it all the way through this fast water. This method will work on much bigger rivers. Just demonstrating on the small water here. Up, let it sink, and drift through. Keep contact with your rod tip. High stick nymphing, or fishing it naked, whatever way you want to call it. Very good, produce a lot of fish. Our next fly will be a Montana stone. This is a fly we're going to tie with some chenille. It's in your kit, and we're going to use the materials that we have provided and try to keep things down to the basics, as we say. We're going to dress the hook with a little bit of thread on there to stop the materials from sliding around, as we talked earlier. I'm going to take some 030 lead and weight this hook. We're going to want to get it down on the bottom of the rivers. This is really a meat and potatoes fly for fish. It's a big food item. I'm going to wrap back over itself here a little bit to build a bit of a taper on the thorax area. So we'll go back and form a little bump on the rear here again for our goose bites. We're going to split just a little lump of thread, that'll help, and do the same as we did on our last fly, the Prince nymph. Take a couple brown goose bites. Make sure you only got one on each side, and it curves. You want it curving out, and you tie it in the head of that little lump on each side. Lay another one on this side. You can just hold it in with your, measure it, and then hold against it with your other thumbnail. You tie it along the side of the head of the bump, and they'll spread nicely there for you. Okay, now we'll take some brown chenille. This is a pretty easy fly for anyone to tie, and we catch a lot of fish too, so that's what we really want. That's our goal as a tire. Now let's take this ahead 2/3, and we're going to just wrap our brown chenille forward. See the taper starting to happen now by the thread on, or the lead underbody. I'm going to tie it off. And this tag here, at the end of the chenille, we're going to use for the wing case. So I'll just nip it off a little longer than I want, leave it stand out of the way. Okay, now what we're going to do is we need some legs on the nymph, so we're going to use some of our brown neck hackle, and I'm just going to tie that in by the tip, just ahead of where we left off here with the chenille. For the tip there, and that'll form our legs in a minute. Now we're going to use some orange chenille for the thorax. They have a bright orange thorax, these salmon flies or stone flies. So we're just going to wrap forward. Get a nice bright thorax. This is really key. And tie it off behind the eye. There we go. Now we just simply take one turn the hackle, another turn forward, another turn forward. You can go 3 or 4 turns, no more. And just space it out, give the appearance of some legs once it's wet. I'll just take the rest of the chenille over the top, lay it down. That forms our wing case. Take our scissors at an angle, at the same angle as the eye of the hook. Use that as your guide. I just lay the scissor right along the side of the eye there, and I'm not going to damage it. form our head, and then whip finish, tie off. Got a couple little loose fibers there, we're going to trim out of the way, and that is just an easy little stonefly, the Montana stone, and it's produced a lot of good trout. Let's talk about casting sink tip lines. These are heavily weighted leaded lines on the tip of a floating section. We want to just cast short casts and then shoot our line out. Let the sink tip work for you. On our forward stroke, we just let the line go. Our next fly is emergent caddis pupa. Now it is just a little variation of Gary LaFontaine's pattern. Basic principles are the same though. We're going to just cover a shank here. We're using a dry fly number 12 here. Just tie this in many different sizes if you will, but we're going to fish this just below the surface film, so we want to use a light shank hook. I'm going to take some tan antron here, and we'll tie it. We're going to tie a piece on each side of the shank to the rear. Okay, that'll form our overbody later. So we're going to use a few different terms here as we use for our parts on flies. So, and you'll notice on recipes too, Don will probably explain this earlier, that the recipes are usually written in the order that the materials are put on the shank. So if you're wondering what to tie on next, just follow the recipe. It's like baking a cake. We're going to put our hare's ear dubbing on below, and this is just tan. Now you can use different shades of olives and even oranges, rusty oranges and different colors for the caddis pupa. The trout will really get on these just below the surface film. They look like they're eating dry flies a lot of time, and we get trapped by throwing dry flies on top when they're actually on just the pupa below the surface. So here's our tan caddis. There's our body. Now we're just going to take this antron, fluff it up a little bit, and then we can pull it over the dubbing. If I pull it too tight, it won't trap the bubble. We want a little bubble of air to get caught in there. The gases when this fly is just ready to come out of its shuck. And if you get the odd little straggler in behind, just leave it hanging there. Or you might even want to pull a few out. Make sure we just get a little envelope, the overbody there. Trim it off behind the eye. There we go. Now we'll take a small amount of elk hair for our wing. And of course we have to take the bottom fuzz out so it stacks. Put it in our hair stacker again, tips first. Take the stacker out at an angle, and you see the nice tips are just black tips are lined up perfectly. We can run that over the back, about halfway over the back, not like our elk hair caddis. This is just a stage the insect prior to that. And a little wing there. Trim it at an angle. Tie them butts down good. Make lots of turns of your thread. Don't be afraid to put lots of turns on. Now, the head you could use some darker color dubbing, but we'll use one of our old favorites again, peacock herl. I got too much here. Let's go with 2 strands peacock herl. Tie it in behind. Now we're going to use this for the head of the fly, so I'm going to leave my tie off position in behind the head, and I'm just going to wrap behind the eye. There, and come in behind. That gives me a bit of a, what we call the head on the fly. I'm going to tie it off in the back. Not behind the eye, but in behind the head of the peacock. Get a little darker coloration there and finishes it off quite nicely. This is a deadly little pattern. Let's show you how to cast for distance. We're going to use our whole rod, specifically the butt of the rod for the power. No wrist movement. We're going to try to pull and push with our arm. Push, pull, push, pull. More like a locomotion. Utilize that rod as a big spring.
Well, I really hope you enjoyed the DVD and the materials package and those great tools. I think it was a great concept to put together, and Brent's the man. He's the one who came up with the idea. And how did you come up with that idea?
Well, Don, I think basically just by doing the fly tying schools, the fly fishing schools I do, and feedback from my students, I think it's a great compliment. I've never seen any package that really had a DVD that went along with the exact materials and give you enough to tie at home, and a dozen of each pattern, and hopefully you can get out and use them and be successful as an angler.
Exactly, great concept. And I know Brent's going to be real busy at Cypress Fly Fishing over in Medicine Hat. We've got a whole bunch of new series coming out for sport fishing on the fly, a bunch of DVDs that we plan on doing together in the future, which could be interesting. And we'll have to just wait and see if everybody gets out in the water with these flies.
Well, I hope they enjoy the sport of fly fishing. It's sure done a lot for me, and I know you as well. It's something we can do for our entire lifetime and with our children, and it's a wonderful experience.
Take the flies out in the water, and we hope to see you on the water in the future.